Hi everybody, welcome back to another segment of Talking About Success. I'm your host, Jack Canfield. My next guest is one of the most interesting people. You've seen these Dos Equis commercials that go, the most interesting man in the world. This guy is actually one of the most interesting guys in the world. Jon Nappa, he's the founder and executive director of Storm Warriors International. It's a nonprofit devoted to creating media and saving lives, which we're going to talk about. And he's also the author of a book that started all called Storm Warriors. And you started out, though, as a kid who loved film, and you ended up in Hollywood, and you work with all these people. You're an amazing story. So just tell us a little about your background in media and television entertainment.
Sure. Yeah, well, when I was a kid, my father put me in charge of the Bell & Howell 8mm projector to show the family movies.
Oh, great.
And so that, I think, sort of lit the flame to start with. And then I graduated to 8mm G.I. Joe animated films as a kid. And then I went to film school and went into the film business right out of school and worked as a sound recordist, a film editor, a studio manager, and then eventually as a writer and a producer. And I worked in Manhattan and Miami, Atlanta, and LA. And I did a variety of programs and worked a lot with Debbie Reynolds and Carrie Fisher and Todd Fisher and their production companies as a writer. And then I also produced children's television for PBS and the Learning Channel. Did some episodic writing for Michael Landon and the Hallmark Channel. And it was a very lucrative career, and it was fulfilling in many ways. But there was always something a little empty about a lot of the projects I was working on. They weren't as fulfilling as I had hoped, although it was exciting and it was an adventure. So I did always find myself looking for projects that might just be a little more meaty for me to get my heart and soul into.
Now, you wrote a book called Storm Warriors, which is really it's a kind of obscure piece of history.
Yes.
How did you come to do that?
Well, it was unintentional. I was thinking I was going to now venture into teen adventure fantasy novel writing. I had identified that as a genre that I thought I could write for, and I had a concept for a series of books, and it would take a little bit of research, though, and I needed particularly to get familiar with nautical terms. So I went searching in bookstores, both old and new, and I ended up in an upstate New York book barn, out in the boonies somewhere, and I was on the third floor of this old barn, and I found this book. It was a first edition. It was written by the Reverend John Gilmore. It was published in England in 1875, and it was chock full of nautical terms. I thought, I found this gold. Turned out to be a book full of real-life stories of men who rescued people in lifeboats, and they were called storm warriors.
Well, I want you to go further with this. So the Reverend, talk about the invention of the lifeboat.
Oh, sure.
This is important.
Well, so what happened is in Ramsgate, just off the shore, this is the coast of England on the English Channel, just off the shore is something that's still there today. It's called the Goodwin Sands, and it's a shifting sandbar. And it's impossible to chart even today because it's made of sand and the edges are always moving. But at its core is the same chalk as the cliffs of Dover. So it was devastating to ships who would strike it in storms, and strike it they did. Hundreds and hundreds of ships struck that. And there would be shipwrecks through the storm season, could be daily, and could be multiple shipwrecks even in the same day. But the horror and tragedy of it was that people on shore could see it and hear it and witness it. And many times in desperation, the captains of these ships, they would light tar barrels on fire as SOSs, as signals to the shore, rescue us, we need help, we're going to perish. And no one was ever able to enter those seas. There was no technology that existed that could enter the stormy surf without the same results. Until Lionel Lucan, a stagecoach builder, and a man of wealth and reputation from London, witnessed this. And he went back to London and he talked with his team, and they designed what they thought could be an insubmergible lifeboat. Basically, it had airtight fore and aft compartments. It was lined with cork, and it had tethers for the men in case they get washed out. And he brought it to Ramsgate. But the next question became, who's going to get in the boat? Because it was a risky proposition, right?
Especially the first time.
That's right.
It's going to work.
That's right. And but men did eventually get in this boat, and they dared. They'd get towed out of harbor, and then they would put their backs into it, and they would row. and they would get out to the Goodwin Sands, and these ships were, the lifeboat would be lifting and lowering and lifting and lowering, and the ships would be breaking up around them, and they had to time the leaps from the lifeboat to the deck of the boat. They had to try to get people on board. It was just unbelievably, vicious and violent and precarious the whole time, super high risk. But they pulled it off many, many times, and they would come back into Ramsgate with these survivors. And the Reverend John Gilmore would gather up these lifeboat men, bring them up to his house, serve them punch, and say, "Tell me what happened." And he logged all those stories, and that was the book I held in my hand.
Really, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So here you've got this book,
Yeah.
Storm Warriors.
Yeah.
And now you went from that to create an organization.
I did.
So how did that book and that whole Storm Warrior thing create the Storm Warriors International Group?
Yeah, well, once I found that story, I did away with the idea of the young adult teen adventure fantasy book, and I really wanted to explore. Gilmore raised the question in that book, what was it that motivated Lucan to, when he died, the only thing he wanted on his tombstone was lifeboat inventor. No mention of the stagecoach or anything else, just lifeboat inventor. And he also asked another question, what did it take for those men to get in the boat? And that's what resonated with me. And so I switched my whole focus, and I wanted to explore as an artist that very question. What does it take before any of us are actually willing to risk our lives to save another? Mm-hmm. And I went to great lengths. I went to England, I went to the Goodwin Sands and explored it and did research in that area and searched their archives. And then I wrote a modern-day version of Storm Warriors exploring that question. And that book was published traditionally in 2007. It did very well. I was invited to speak around the country in bookstores and book clubs. And in the course of speaking in those places, the readers were asking me questions. And it was provoked by the book, of course, but there was in particular an afterword in the book that I wrote in which I asked the reader to consider that perhaps this story is a metaphor. And maybe the lifeboat is symbolic of our gifts and our talents, and these stormy seas and shipwrecks symbolic of the crises all around us, if only our eyes and ears were open to them. And the question might be for all of us today, what does it take before any of us are willing to risk our lifeboat, our gifts, our talents? In other words, mobilize our resources in service to others in need. What's it take for that to really happen? And so people responded to that, and they said, well, John, I'd like to be a modern-day storm warrior. How do I do it? Like, what's a good organization to get involved with? Well, I hadn't done my homework on that, so I was kind of caught a little off guard, but I had indeed provoked these questions. So I decided maybe I should vet a few organizations and share that information because these questions were going to keep coming up. And I did, and that grew into a newsletter of about 10,000 plus subscribers, and since then, that grew into an organization in which we now, because I looked at it, what's my gift? My gift is storytelling, filmmaker, media, communication. So is it possible that that could be a worthwhile gift to bring into these crises? So I did some research. I began approaching organizations, and I said, listen, if we could help you, if we could tell your story for fundraising purposes, for recruiting, for training, would that help you? And to them, it was a godsend because they didn't have the resources or the skill sets in-house to do it, but they needed those tools. Mm-hmm. And so we began to gift that over and over again, and now we've done it internationally. We've done it throughout India and human sex trafficking. We've done it throughout Vietnam and a variety of topics, and now here in the States.
So we don't have a lot of time left, but I want you to unpack a little bit the story about Rashira.
Oh, yeah.
This is so important.
Well, just before I went on the first trip, there was another book that came out. It was a Pulitzer Prize-winning author, Nicholas Kristof, the journalist, and he wrote a book called Half the Sky, which profiled stories of women of courage. And in that book was a story of Ruchira Gupta, who had started this grassroots organization in India rescuing women from sex trafficking. And I had contacted her and asked her if she could use this help, and she said, oh, we would really benefit if you could do it. So I was able to put together some funds and put together some creative team, and we got ready to go. And a couple of nights before it was time to go, I got cold feet because now I was facing that very question that I had asked in an abstract way in the book, what does it take to risk your life? And now I was facing it for real. And it was a lot easier to answer as an author posing a theoretical question than a man about to leave his wife and family to go overseas to enter into some very crime-ridden and dangerous places to rescue women in crisis. And when it came down to that, I remember through my own time of personal reflection and meditation, I said, I think what's happening to these women is wrong. It shouldn't happen. And I could never perpetrate this on a woman. And they need to be helped. But I'm not sure I can go there. Because I suddenly realized to put myself in that jeopardy was to also put in jeopardy my wife and my children. They depended on me. And I just felt afraid for them. And I realized the question was much bigger than I had imagined. Because it's not just what you're willing to sacrifice, but also those who are beside you, that are with you along the way. But then that still small voice inside, it said, well, what if it was your daughter, Rebecca? And, I said, if it was my daughter, there isn't a place on this planet that I wouldn't set my foot. If I felt for 1 minute that she was suffering those kinds of indignities or horrors, I would never cease until I set her free, until I rescued her. And that voice inside said, well, they are your daughters. They're all of our daughters. And that was the shift for me. That was the change. They are our daughters. They're our mothers, our sisters. They're not labels. They're not just statistics. They're real people in real crisis. And so we went to India. We made those films. We made a difference. And it changed my life.
Beautiful, beautiful. Were you ever in really serious danger when you were there?
There were times when we were told, do not show your cameras. Don't look like you're here to make any kind of a film or cause any kind of trouble, because you are messing with a criminal economy. And they do not want that disrupted, right. The ones benefiting from it. It was very hard for us to not show our cameras. It was impossible, actually. So we had to try to look like we weren't there to make a film, even though we were.
Right.
So when we got into some really shady places and these narrow alleys that you cannot get out of quickly, there would be men and different posts around there, and they would watch us like eagles and hawks, and we would have to walk by. We knew where we had to go. We knew what door we had to go in. We knew what stairs we had to go up. And sometimes we would just walk right by them because there was too many.
Not safe.
And we'd have to wait and come back again. And then when we felt it was safer, never feeling it was safe, we would duck in. And we were able to be directly involved with the rescue and recovery of real women in crisis that APNIAP then brings into safe environments. And through an entire experience of support and transition, they help these women get free and stay free.
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. So if someone out there says, I want to be a storm warrior, I want to make a difference, what do you recommend?
Well, there's like 5 ways to engage with storm warriors. But the first thing I want to say, if you're helping the old lady cross the street, you're a storm warrior. If you're putting it on the line to help people who need help and you're willing to go out of your way, you are a storm warrior. So there are many storm warriors out there. You certainly don't have to be directly involved with our organization to be considered one in our eyes. But many people do come and get connected with us. And there's primarily 5 ways that they engage with us. So on what we would call the development side, where people help us help others, they can volunteer in a variety of ways, from creative services to administrative services to events, support, that sort of thing. A lot of ways. And they can check any of these ways on our website, stormwarriors.org. Another way is they can, what we find is a lot of people, they really want to be a storm warrior. They really want to save people, but they're afraid. And they're not sure that their gifts or their talents or their resources are sufficient, that it could really make a difference. So we also work on, and we provide a lot of free material on helping them understand their own gifts, their own talents, their own temperaments, so that they understand better who they are and what their capacities are. And then we show them how that lines up with opportunities that exist. Third way is we offer storytelling school. We teach young people and we scholarship them in the ones that get selected, and we highlight underprivileged populations or underserved populations. But we look for high school kids that have the attitude and aspiration to get involved with storytelling for social good, and we teach them everything in hands-on workshops from script to screen.
So it's storytelling through like documentary filmmaking.
Through documentary filmmaking and video journalism. So it's not just filmmaking for the sake of filmmaking. It's media with a mission.
Right.
And then another way to get involved is if you're looking to get connected to organizations that are involved with specific works in specific sectors, whether it's opioid addiction intervention or human trafficking rescuing or whatever it might be. We're involved with so many. We can turn them on to those organizations, link them up with those organizations, even be a conduit for them to go and volunteer in those organizations or contribute to those organizations. And then the other way that people get involved with us is if they're victims or survivors that have been benefited by these organizations, we give them platform to tell their stories.
Oh, good.
And then finally, there's the organizations themselves. They come to us and we fully benefit, we fully gift comprehensive media packages for all the variety of needs that an organization might need.
I love it. That is so comprehensive. Good for you, man. Good for you. 2 last questions. How has all this changed your life?
Well, it's changed it in a big way. When I first started Storm Warriors, I kind of did it in between projects. It was sort of my way to give back under the radar. But in the last few years, I reached a milestone in my life. I turned 60 just a year ago. And, I don't consider myself old, but I've certainly noticed I've gotten older.
Yeah.
And my perspective has changed. And I made a decision to go all in with Storm Warriors. So starting in 2017, that's what I do. I'm really not doing any motion picture projects or television projects any longer outside of the ones that we're cultivating through Storm Warriors. I've really just devoted myself in creating media to help these organizations that are directly involved with rescuing and recovering and restoring and relieving real people in real crisis, and then training others how to do the same so that this can go on impacting hopefully beyond my lifetime.
Well, you are a wonderful being. I'm really glad to know you. Proud to know you.
Thank you,
and,
Jack.
I hope that this little interview will bring more people to you and support your work and get involved with your work. So once again, it's stormwarriors.org.
Yes.
And they just go there and find out more and all the different ways you said that people can get involved.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jack.
Thank
I
you for your
appreciate
service and thank you for being on my show.
All right. My pleasure.
All right. All right, everybody. That went a little longer than usual, but we have one more commercial break before our last segment, so stick around. We'll be right back.